Some people walk into your life wearing a mask so perfect that you never think to look underneath. You invite them into your home. You share your secrets with them. You trust them with the most vulnerable parts of yourself. And all the while, they are studying you. They are learning exactly where to strike when the time comes. They are waiting. And when they finally reveal who they truly are, when that mask slips and you see the face of your enemy staring back at you from across the kitchen table, you realize that the person you thought you knew never existed at all. That is what happened to me. That is the story I need to tell you. Because even now, 3 years later, when I think about Chloe Winters and everything she did to me, my hands still shake, my chest still tightens, and I still cannot believe that I ever called her my friend. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and gossip travels faster than the speed of light. My parents were good people, honest people, the kind who worked double shifts and saved every penny to give their kids a better life. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and when I graduated with a degree in marketing, I felt like I had the whole world ahead of me. I moved to Chicago with 2 suitcases and a dream, determined to prove that a girl from nowhere could make something of herself in the big city. Those first few years were brutal. I worked entry-level jobs that paid barely enough to cover rent. I lived in a series of terrible apartments with terrible roommates, from the guy who never cleaned to the girl who threw parties every night to the one who skipped out on rent and left me holding the bag. By the time I was 25, I had finally landed a decent position at a mid-sized marketing firm. It was not glamorous, but it was steady. I was making progress. I was building something. The only problem was that I was exhausted. I was tired of the roommate roulette, tired of coming home to strangers and their drama. What I wanted more than anything was stability. I wanted to come home to a clean apartment and a friendly face. I wanted a roommate who felt like family. That is exactly what Chloe seemed to offer. I found her listing online on one of those roommate matching websites. She had posted a cheerful ad about a 2-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood on the north side. The photos showed a bright, clean space with hardwood floors and big windows. Her description was warm and inviting. She wrote about how she was looking for someone responsible, someone who valued cleanliness and quiet, but who also wanted to have the occasional glass of wine and movie night. She described herself as a 26-year-old marketing professional who loved cooking, reading, and exploring the city. She sounded perfect. I messaged her immediately, and within hours, she wrote back. Her response was enthusiastic and friendly. She said my profile had stood out to her, that I seemed like exactly the kind of person she was hoping to find. We exchanged a few more messages, then set up a time to meet for coffee. I still remember the first time I saw her. She was already at the coffee shop when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a latte in front of her. She had honey blonde hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders, clear blue eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. She stood as I approached and greeted me like an old friend, pulling me into a warm hug before I could even introduce myself. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Chloe was charming, funny, and seemingly open about her life. She told me she had grown up in Connecticut, the daughter of successful parents, but that she had always wanted to make her own way in the world. She had moved to Chicago a few years earlier and worked as a brand strategist at a boutique agency. She talked about her love of vintage furniture and her collection of houseplants. She asked thoughtful questions about my job, my goals, my family. She remembered every detail I shared and brought them up naturally throughout the conversation. By the time we said goodbye, I felt like I had known her for years. Moving in with Chloe felt like a fresh start. The apartment was even better than the photos had suggested. It was spacious and filled with natural light, decorated with tasteful furniture and carefully chosen artwork. Chloe had created a warm, inviting home, and she welcomed me into it with open arms. She helped me carry boxes up the stairs. She gave me the bigger bedroom because it had a closet she thought I would appreciate. She stocked the fridge with groceries and insisted we cook dinner together that first night. For the first few months, everything was wonderful. Chloe and I fell into an easy rhythm. We would cook meals together several nights a week, trading off responsibilities and sharing recipes from our childhoods. We would watch movies on the couch with glasses of wine, dissecting the plots and laughing at the bad dialogue. We would take long walks through the neighborhood, exploring little shops and cafes, talking about everything and nothing. She became my closest friend in Chicago, the person I turned to at the end of every hard day. Chloe had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the world. When you talked, she listened with her whole body, leaning in, nodding, maintaining eye contact. She remembered the names of your coworkers and asked follow-up questions weeks later. She noticed when you were stressed and would surprise you with your favorite takeout or a freshly brewed cup of tea. She seemed genuinely invested in your happiness, and that made you want to invest in hers. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I missed. I can identify the moments when her mask slipped, just for a second, before she pulled it back into place. But at the time, I was so hungry for connection, so grateful to have found someone who seemed to understand me, that I ignored the little whispers of doubt that occasionally crossed my mind. The first sign came about 3 months after I moved in. I had been working on a major project at my job, a campaign for a new client that could potentially lead to a promotion. I was excited about it and talked about it at home, bouncing ideas off Chloe, who always seemed interested and supportive. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, a strange expression on her face. She asked me about my project, and I enthusiastically shared an update. We had just pitched the concept to the client, and the initial response had been positive. My boss had told me privately that I was a strong candidate for the senior associate position that was opening up. I was thrilled. But as I talked, I noticed something flicker behind Chloe's eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual warm smile, but for a moment, it looked almost like resentment. She congratulated me, of course. She poured us glasses of wine and toasted to my success. But later that night, as I lay in bed replaying the conversation, I could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just overtired from the long hours at work. I pushed the thought away and went to sleep. Over the next few weeks, I noticed other small changes. Chloe started asking more pointed questions about my job, my salary, my career trajectory. At first, it seemed like normal curiosity from a friend. But there was an edge to her questions that had not been there before. She would make little comments about how lucky I was to work at a growing company, how she wished her agency had the same opportunities for advancement. She would compare our situations in ways that seemed designed to highlight her own frustrations. I tried to be supportive. I asked about her work, encouraged her to pursue new opportunities, offered to help her update her resume. But my efforts seemed to backfire. The more successful I became at my job, the more distant Chloe seemed to grow. Our cozy dinners became less frequent. Our conversations became shorter. She started spending more time in her room with the door closed, and when we did interact, there was a coolness in her voice that had not been there before. I convinced myself that she was just going through a difficult time. Maybe she was stressed about work or dealing with personal issues she had not shared with me. I gave her space and tried not to take her behavior personally. I was too focused on my own life to realize that something much more sinister was brewing beneath the surface. The promotion came through in the spring. I was officially named senior associate with a significant raise and expanded responsibilities. It was the biggest professional achievement of my life, and I was over the moon. I rushed home that evening, eager to share the news with Chloe. I stopped along the way to pick up a bottle of champagne and ingredients for a celebratory dinner. When I walked through the door, Chloe was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand. She looked up at me with an expression I could not quite read. I held up the champagne bottle and announced my promotion, grinning from ear to ear. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she smiled, but it was not the warm, genuine smile I was used to. It was tight, controlled, almost mechanical. She congratulated me and stood to give me a hug, but her body felt stiff in my arms. As we pulled apart, she said something that stayed with me long afterward. She said that she was happy for me, but that not everyone had it as easy as I did. She said that some people had to fight twice as hard for half as much. Then she excused herself to her room, claiming she had a headache. I stood in the kitchen, champagne bottle in hand, feeling the joy drain out of my body. Something was deeply wrong, and I could no longer pretend otherwise. That night, for the first time, I wondered if I really knew Chloe at all. The changes in our living situation became impossible to ignore. Chloe started coming home late and leaving early. She stopped contributing to our shared groceries and household supplies. When I asked her about it, she would make vague excuses about being busy or stressed. Our friendly conversations dwindled to polite nods in passing. The apartment that had once felt so welcoming now felt tense and uncomfortable. I tried to address it directly. One evening, I knocked on her door and asked if we could talk. She let me in, her expression guarded. I told her that I had noticed she seemed upset lately, that I was worried about our friendship, that I wanted to understand what was going on. She listened in silence, her face unreadable. When I finished, she sighed and said she had just been going through some things. She said work was difficult, that she felt stuck, that she was jealous of my success, and she was not proud of it. The admission seemed to pain her. She apologized for being distant and promised to try harder. We hugged, and for a moment, I felt hopeful that we could get back to the way things had been. But the apology was just another mask. Within a week, things were worse than ever. And then I met Daniel. Daniel Reed was a software engineer who worked at a startup in the same building as my office. We had crossed paths a few times in the lobby and the coffee shop downstairs, exchanging polite smiles and brief hellos. One afternoon, we ended up in the elevator together, and he struck up a conversation. He was tall and kind-eyed, with a quiet confidence that I found immediately appealing. He asked about my work, and when I mentioned my recent promotion, he seemed genuinely impressed. He congratulated me without a trace of jealousy or condescension. We started getting coffee together during breaks. Then we moved to lunch, then dinner. Daniel was unlike anyone I had dated before. He was thoughtful and patient, a good listener who remembered the smallest details of our conversations. He made me laugh. He made me feel seen. Within a few weeks, I knew I was falling for him. Introducing Daniel to Chloe felt like an important step. He was becoming a significant part of my life, and she was supposed to be my closest friend. I wanted them to like each other. I wanted the two halves of my world to fit together seamlessly. The first meeting seemed to go well. Daniel came over for dinner one evening, and Chloe was charming and friendly. She asked him questions about his work and his interests. She complimented his sense of humor and told him how lucky he was to be dating someone as wonderful as me. They seemed to get along beautifully. I went to bed that night feeling happy and relieved. But then I started noticing things. Chloe began asking about Daniel frequently. At first, her questions seemed innocent. She wanted to know how things were going, what we were doing together, how serious the relationship was becoming. But her curiosity started to feel excessive. She wanted to know where he lived, what he drove, how much he earned. She wanted to know details of our private conversations, our disagreements, our plans for the future. When Daniel came over, she would linger in the common areas longer than necessary. She would find excuses to interrupt our conversations, to insert herself into our activities. She would dress more carefully when she knew he was coming, wearing outfits that were notably more provocative than her usual style. She would laugh a little too loudly at his jokes, touch his arm a little too frequently, hold eye contact a little too long. I told myself I was being paranoid. Chloe was naturally friendly and outgoing. She was just being welcoming to my boyfriend. But the uncomfortable feeling in my gut would not go away. Something was off, and I knew it. The first real red flag came one Saturday afternoon. Daniel and I had plans to see a movie, but he had texted to say he was running late because of a work emergency. I was waiting in the living room when Chloe emerged from her bedroom, dressed to the nines, and announced that she was heading out to meet a friend. She left, and about 10 minutes later, I realized I had forgotten my phone charger in her room. We had borrowed things from each other before, and she had never minded, so I went in to grab it. What I found on her desk made my blood run cold. It was a notebook, open to a page filled with her handwriting. At the top of the page, she had written Daniel's name, surrounded by little hearts. Below that was a list of details about him, things she could only have learned by paying very close attention. His favorite coffee order, his gym schedule, his parents' names, the neighborhood where he lived, the model of his car. I stared at the page, my heart pounding. This was not normal curiosity. This was obsession. I quickly found my charger and retreated to my room, my mind racing. I did not know what to do. Confronting Chloe seemed dangerous, but saying nothing felt impossible. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog of anxiety, barely able to focus on the movie with Daniel. That night, after he left, I lay awake for hours, trying to make sense of what I had discovered. Maybe it was innocent, I told myself. Maybe she just had a crush and was too embarrassed to admit it. But the details in that notebook suggested something more calculated, more deliberate. She was not just daydreaming about my boyfriend, she was studying him. I decided to watch and wait. I started paying closer attention to Chloe's behavior, looking for patterns and clues. And the more I watched, the more I saw. She had started texting Daniel directly. I saw his phone light up with her name one evening when we were having dinner together. When I asked him about it later, he seemed slightly uncomfortable. He said she had messaged him asking for a restaurant recommendation, and they had exchanged a few messages about food. He said it was no big deal, that he had not wanted to be rude by ignoring her. I believed him. Daniel was unfailingly polite and would not have wanted to create awkwardness with my roommate. But I also knew that Chloe was up to something. She was trying to create a connection with him, to insert herself into his life in ways that did not involve me. And I needed to find out why. The answer came sooner than I expected, and it was more devastating than I could have imagined. A few weeks later, I came home from work early. I had developed a terrible headache and asked my boss if I could leave at lunchtime. The apartment was quiet when I arrived, but I could hear voices coming from Chloe's room. I assumed she was on a phone call and headed toward my own room. But then I heard my name. I stopped in the hallway, listening. Chloe was talking to someone, and she was talking about me. Her voice was low and intimate, almost conspiratorial. She was saying that I was not as smart as everyone thought, that my success was mostly luck, that I did not deserve the things I had. She was saying that Daniel was too good for me, that he would eventually realize his mistake, that she was just waiting for the right moment. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My roommate, my friend, the person I had trusted with my life, was systematically undermining me behind my back. And whoever was on the other end of that conversation was apparently a willing participant. I crept back to the front door and closed it loudly, announcing my presence. By the time I reached the hallway, Chloe had emerged from her room with a perfectly pleasant smile. She asked what I was doing home so early, her voice sweet and concerned. She offered to make me tea for my headache. She was the picture of caring friendship. I played along, accepting the tea and thanking her for her kindness. But inside, I was reeling. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been a lie. The woman who had welcomed me into her home, who had cooked dinner with me and watched movies with me and listened to my hopes and dreams, had been working against me from the start. But why? What had I ever done to her? The question consumed me over the following days. I replayed every interaction we had ever had, searching for the moment when things had gone wrong. I could not find one. As far as I could tell, Chloe's hostility had nothing to do with anything I had done. It was about who I was and what I had. She was jealous. That was the simplest explanation. She was jealous of my job, my relationship, my happiness. And rather than dealing with those feelings honestly, she had chosen to tear me down in secret, to poison my life while pretending to be my friend. I did not confront her. Not yet. I knew that I needed more information, more evidence, before I could make a move. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal before I could figure out how to respond. So I started gathering evidence. I became hyper-aware of Chloe's behavior, noting every interaction, every comment, every suspicious action. I started keeping my own notebook, documenting dates and times and details. I was careful not to let her see any change in my behavior. I continued to be friendly and trusting, to give her every opportunity to show her true colors. The evidence accumulated slowly but steadily. I discovered that she had been bad-mouthing me to mutual acquaintances. A friend of a friend mentioned casually that Chloe had described me as difficult and demanding. A colleague mentioned that Chloe had reached out to him on social media, asking questions about my work performance. A neighbor told me that Chloe had been complaining about me, saying I was a terrible roommate who never cleaned and played loud music at all hours, which was completely untrue. She was building a narrative. She was positioning herself as the victim and me as the villain. And I had no idea what she planned to do with that narrative. The situation with Daniel became increasingly concerning. His phone lit up with her messages more and more frequently. He started mentioning her in conversation, repeating things she had told him, sharing her opinions on various topics. When I pointed out that she seemed to be texting him a lot, he brushed off my concerns. He said she was just friendly, just bored, just looking for someone to talk to. He said I was being insecure. His dismissal stung, but I tried to understand his perspective. Chloe was skilled at appearing harmless. She knew exactly how to present herself to get people on her side. Daniel was not stupid or disloyal. He was just being manipulated by someone who was very good at it. I needed proof. Something concrete and undeniable. Something that would make Daniel understand the truth about Chloe before it was too late. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Chloe was going out of town for a long weekend to visit her parents. She asked me to water her plants while she was gone and gave me permission to go into her room if needed. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. The morning after she left, I entered her room with the intention of finding answers. I told myself I was just protecting myself, just gathering the information I needed to understand the threat I was facing. But I will not pretend I did not feel guilty. I was violating her privacy, crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. But desperation makes you do things you never thought you were capable of. Her room was immaculate, everything in its place, curated and controlled. I started with her desk, looking through papers and notebooks. I found more of the same obsessive documentation about Daniel, his schedule mapped out in detail, notes about his favorite things, his habits, his preferences, screenshots of his social media posts, printed and filed in a folder. It was unnerving, but the truly damning discovery was on her computer. I believed him. Daniel was unfailingly polite and would not have wanted to create awkwardness with my roommate. But I also knew that Chloe was up to something. She was trying to create a connection with him, to insert herself into his life in ways that did not involve me. And I needed to find out why. The answer came sooner than I expected, and it was more devastating than I could have imagined. A few weeks later, I came home from work early. I had developed a terrible headache and asked my boss if I could leave at lunchtime. The apartment was quiet when I arrived, but I could hear voices coming from Chloe's room. I assumed she was on a phone call and headed toward my own room. But then I heard my name. She had left it logged in, the screen dim but unlocked. I touched the trackpad and it came to life, revealing her email inbox. I knew I should not look. I knew it was wrong. But I also knew that I might never have another chance to understand what she was doing. I started reading. The emails painted a picture of a woman I did not recognize. Or rather, they revealed the woman she had been hiding all along. There were emails to mutual friends, filled with lies about me. She told elaborate stories about my supposed bad behavior, painting me as unstable, jealous, and difficult. She portrayed herself as a saint who had tried to help me, but had been met with ingratitude. She asked people to keep the information confidential, framing it as concern for my reputation while systematically destroying it. There were emails to people at my company. She had reached out to 2 of my coworkers, introducing herself as my concerned roommate. She had told them that I was struggling with personal issues that were affecting my work. She had suggested that I might not be reliable enough for the senior position I had just received. She had planted seeds of doubt about my professionalism. And then there were the emails to Daniel, dozens of them spanning weeks. She had created a secondary email address and had been corresponding with him under the pretense of planning a surprise birthday party for me. She had used the party as an excuse to communicate frequently and intimately. She had shared stories about her life, her dreams, her loneliness. She had positioned herself as a kindred spirit, someone who understood him in ways that I did not. She had subtly criticized me, framing her criticisms as loving observations from someone who knew me well. She had suggested that our relationship was not as solid as it appeared. Reading those emails, I felt sick. Chloe had been waging a secret campaign against me on multiple fronts. She had been working to destroy my reputation, my career, and my relationship, all while smiling at me across the breakfast table, and I had been completely oblivious. But the worst discovery was yet to come. In a folder marked with an innocuous label, I found a document that changed everything. It was a financial record, and it showed that Chloe had been stealing from me. For months, she had been skimming small amounts from my portion of the utility bills. She had created fake invoices with slightly inflated numbers and had pocketed the difference. Individually, the amounts were small enough to escape notice. But over time, they added up to hundreds of dollars. There was more. She had accessed my Amazon account and had been ordering items using my saved payment methods. Books, household supplies, small electronics, always things that could be explained away as shared purchases if questioned. Always amounts just under the threshold that would trigger automatic fraud alerts. And there was a document that appeared to be a draft of a plan to take even more. Chloe had noted that she had access to my mailbox key. She had written about how she could intercept my bank statements and credit card offers. She had drafted a timeline for gradually increasing the amounts she took. She had mapped out an exit strategy, a plan to move out suddenly and claim that I was the one who owed her money. She had even outlined how she would use the network of lies she had built to ensure that everyone believed her version of events. I sat in her desk chair, trembling, as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. This was not impulsive or emotional. This was calculated, methodical, and cold. Chloe had been systematically dismantling my life, and she had no intention of stopping. I took photos of everything: the notebooks, the printed screenshots, the emails, the financial documents. I forwarded copies of the most damning emails to my own account. I was careful to leave everything exactly as I had found it. Chloe could not know that I knew, not yet. When I left her room, my hands were shaking and my mind was racing. I had the evidence I needed, but what was I supposed to do with it? The next few days were some of the hardest of my life. Chloe came back from her trip, cheerful and friendly as ever. She thanked me for watering her plants and gave me a candle she had picked up at a shop in Connecticut. She asked about my weekend and listened attentively to my fabricated answers. She was the perfect roommate, the perfect friend. And I hated her. I hated her for the lies, for the theft, for the systematic destruction of everything I had worked so hard to build. I hated her for making me doubt myself, for making me feel crazy when I had started to suspect the truth. I hated her for wearing that mask so convincingly that I had trusted her with my life. But more than hate, I felt fear. What would happen when she discovered that I knew? What would she do when she realized that her carefully constructed plan was falling apart? She had already shown that she was capable of anything. I had no idea what she might do if she felt cornered. I needed allies. I needed people who would believe me, who would help me navigate the nightmare I had stumbled into, and I needed to move quickly before Chloe had a chance to do any more damage. My first call was to Daniel. I asked him to meet me at a coffee shop, away from the apartment, away from Chloe's listening ears. He could tell from my voice that something was wrong, and he agreed immediately. When I saw him walk through the door, I felt a wave of relief so intense that I nearly burst into tears. I told him everything. I showed him the photos on my phone, walking him through the emails and the financial records. I watched his expression change from confusion to shock to horror as the truth sank in. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on the table. He said he felt like such an idiot. He said he had thought she was just friendly, just a little lonely. He had not seen the manipulation for what it was. He apologized over and over, even though none of it was his fault. Chloe had played him just as surely as she had played me. We talked for hours, strategizing about what to do next. Daniel was a problem solver by nature, and he approached the situation with the same methodical thinking he applied to his work. He helped me make a list of priorities, protect my finances, document everything, find a new place to live, build a case that could hold up if legal action became necessary. He also helped me see something I had been struggling to accept, that Chloe was not going to stop, that people like her did not change, that the only way to truly protect myself was to get out of her orbit completely and make sure she could not follow. But before I could do any of that, I needed to know one more thing. I needed to understand why. Why me? Why go to such elaborate lengths to destroy someone who had never done anything to hurt her? What had I done to inspire such focused, relentless hostility? The answer came from an unexpected source. Jenna Torres was a journalist who worked for a local news website. She was also a casual acquaintance of Chloe's, someone they had met at a networking event years earlier. When I reached out to her, explaining that I was trying to understand some things about Chloe's past, she agreed to meet me for coffee. What she told me was illuminating. Jenna had known Chloe in college. They had been in the same social circle, though they had never been close. Even then, Jenna said, there had been something off about her. She was charming and popular, but there was always an undercurrent of competitiveness that felt unhealthy. She would befriend people who had things she wanted, money, status, connections, and then she would slowly work to undermine them. There had been incidents. A girl in their dorm who had dated a guy Chloe liked. The girl's reputation had been destroyed by rumors that seemed to come from nowhere. A classmate who had landed an internship Chloe wanted. The classmate had found herself iced out of social groups, her friends suddenly cold and distant. The pattern was always the same. Chloe would position herself as a victim, would spread lies in confidence, would work behind the scenes to dismantle whoever stood in her way. The behavior had continued after college. Jenna had heard stories from mutual friends about roommates who had been manipulated, co-workers who had been sabotaged, relationships that had been destroyed. Chloe left a trail of wreckage wherever she went, and she always walked away clean, her reputation intact, her mask firmly in place. Listening to Jenna, I felt a strange mix of horror and validation. I was not Chloe's first victim. I was just the latest in a long line. She had targeted me not because of anything I had done, but simply because I had things she wanted. A successful career, a loving relationship, happiness. To someone like Chloe, those things were intolerable in others. She could not stand to see someone else have what she felt she deserved. Jenna gave me one more piece of information that proved invaluable. Chloe had a weakness. For all her skill at manipulation, she was ultimately insecure. She craved approval and validation. She needed people to see her as the victim, the hero, the good one. If that image were ever publicly shattered, if people saw who she really was, it would devastate her far more than any other consequence could. I thanked Jenna and left the coffee shop with a new sense of clarity. I knew what I needed to do. I was not just going to protect myself from Chloe. I was going to expose her. I was going to make sure that she could never do to anyone else what she had done to me. But I had to be smart about it. Chloe was cunning and had already laid extensive groundwork to make me look like the bad guy. If I went public with accusations, she would spin the narrative in her favor. She would claim that I was the unstable one, the jealous one, the liar. She would use the network of lies she had built to discredit me. I needed to let her expose herself. I needed to give her enough rope to hang herself with. And I needed to make sure that when she fell, everyone would see the truth. The first step was securing my finances. I opened new bank accounts and transferred my money into them. I changed all my passwords and set up two-factor authentication on everything. I put a freeze on my credit to prevent anyone from opening accounts in my name. I set up alerts for any unusual activity. Chloe would not be able to steal from me anymore. The second step was finding a new place to live. I spent my lunch breaks touring apartments, looking for somewhere safe and affordable. I found a small studio in a quiet building on the other side of the city. The landlord agreed to let me move in at the end of the month. I signed the lease without telling Chloe. The third step was the hardest. I had to maintain the facade of normalcy. I had to keep living with Chloe, pretending I did not know what she had done, until I was ready to make my move. Every conversation, every shared meal, every friendly smile felt like torture. But I knew that tipping her off too early would only give her time to prepare, to cover her tracks, to strike first. So I played my part. I was the oblivious roommate, the trusting friend. I chatted with her about work and weekend plans. I watched movies with her on the couch. I thanked her for the candle from Connecticut and told her it smelled lovely. And all the while, I was building my case. I gathered more evidence. I kept detailed records of our interactions, noting anything that might be useful later. I asked Daniel to save all of Chloe's messages to him, documenting the manipulation in her own words. I reached out to the people she had lied to about me, carefully explaining the truth and asking them to keep our conversations confidential. Most of them were horrified to learn that they had been manipulated. Several offered to provide statements if needed. I also consulted a lawyer. A friend of a friend knew an attorney who specialized in civil disputes, and I met with her to understand my options. She reviewed my evidence and confirmed that Chloe's theft was legally actionable. The amounts were small enough to be misdemeanors rather than felonies, but they were still crimes. She also noted that the emails to my co-workers could potentially constitute defamation, depending on whether they had affected my professional standing. The lawyer advised me to file a police report about the theft. Even if the case never went to court, having an official record would be valuable. It would establish that I was the victim, not the perpetrator. It would protect me from any attempts by Chloe to flip the script. I filed the report on a Tuesday afternoon while Chloe was at work. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but honest. Cases like this, involving small-scale fraud between roommates, were difficult to prosecute. The amounts were too small to justify significant resources, but the report would be on file, and if Chloe ever tried anything again, there would be a documented history of her behavior. It was not the justice I wanted, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Chloe continued her campaign, completely unaware that I was watching. She sent more emails under her fake address, continuing to correspond with Daniel about the supposed surprise party. She told him that I had been acting strangely lately, that I seemed stressed and withdrawn, that she was worried about me. She suggested that he might want to give me some space, that I seemed to need time to sort myself out. Daniel showed me the messages as they arrived, and together we crafted his responses. He played along, expressing concern for me, asking Chloe for her insight and advice. He was feeding her exactly what she wanted to hear, confirmation that her manipulation was working. She had no idea that every word she wrote was being saved, documented, and prepared as evidence against her. I also started recording my conversations with Chloe. My state had one-party consent laws, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was part of without informing the other person. I used an app on my phone that ran in the background, capturing audio whenever I was in the apartment. Most of the recordings were innocuous, but occasionally Chloe would let something slip, a snide comment about me, a reference to something she knew that she should not have known, a hint at her true feelings beneath the friendly facade. The weeks passed, and my move-out date approached. I had told Chloe that I was planning to stay at Daniel's for a while, a partial truth that would explain my increased absence from the apartment. She had seemed concerned and asked if everything was okay between us. I assured her that it was, that I just wanted to spend more time with him as our relationship progressed. She had smiled and said she understood, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. The day I moved out was a carefully orchestrated performance. I had arranged for a moving company to come while Chloe was at work. They packed up my room in record time and transported everything to my new studio. By the time Chloe came home that evening, every trace of me was gone. Except for one thing. I left a letter on the kitchen table. It was brief and to the point. I told her that I knew everything. I told her about the notebooks, the emails, the theft, the lies. I told her that I had documented all of it and had already filed a police report. I told her that if she ever contacted me again, if she ever spread lies about me again, if she ever came near anyone I cared about, I would not hesitate to take legal action. And I told her that I was sending a copy of my evidence to everyone she had contacted in her smear campaign. Her co-workers, our mutual friends, the people she had tried to turn against me. They would all know the truth about who she really was. I did not sign the letter. I did not need to. Then I walked out the door and did not look back. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I had anticipated, and yet it was still more satisfying than I could have imagined. Chloe tried to call me 17 times that first night. She left voice messages that swung wildly between rage and pleading. In the first few, she was furious, accusing me of betraying her trust, of invading her privacy, of fabricating lies. In the later ones, her tone shifted. She was desperate, tearful, begging me to reconsider. She said it was all a misunderstanding, that she could explain everything, that I was throwing away our friendship over nothing. I did not respond to any of them. I blocked her number and her email address. I blocked her on every social media platform. I wanted no further contact, no opportunity for her to manipulate or deceive me. As far as I was concerned, Chloe Winters no longer existed, but her world was crumbling, and I had a front row seat to the destruction. The emails I sent worked exactly as intended. I had been careful to present the information objectively, letting the evidence speak for itself. I included copies of her emails, highlighting the lies and manipulation. I included the financial records showing her theft. I included a brief summary of what I had experienced and an invitation for anyone with questions to reach out. The responses started coming within hours. People were shocked. People were angry. People felt betrayed by someone they had trusted. Her co-workers were the first to react. I had sent the information to 3 people at her agency, the ones she had contacted in her attempt to sabotage my career. Within days, I heard through the grapevine that Chloe was in serious trouble at work. Her bosses had launched an investigation into her conduct. Colleagues who had once admired her were now looking at her with suspicion and distrust. She was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. 2 weeks later, she was terminated. The official reason was a violation of company ethics policies, but everyone knew the real story. Chloe Winters, the charming brand strategist who everyone thought they knew, had been exposed as a fraud. The social fallout was equally devastating. Mutual friends who had believed her lies now saw the truth. Many of them reached out to me, apologizing for their role in spreading her false narrative. Some were angry with themselves for being deceived. Others were angry with Chloe for using them as tools in her manipulation. Either way, she found herself increasingly isolated, cut off from the social network she had worked so hard to cultivate. I heard that she tried to spin the situation. She told people that I was the real villain, that I had invaded her privacy and fabricated evidence, that I was conducting a vendetta against her out of jealousy. But the evidence was too comprehensive and too damning. Every time she claimed innocence, someone would point to the emails she had written in her own words, the documents she had created herself, the pattern of behavior that could not be explained away. Her parents were reportedly mortified. The wealthy, successful family from Connecticut had always presented a perfect image to the world, and Chloe's exposure threatened to tarnish that image. I heard that they had distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Whether that was true or not, I did not know, and frankly, I did not care. For me, the weeks after my move were a period of recovery and rebuilding. I settled into my new studio, decorating it with things that brought me joy. I focused on my work, channeling my energy into the projects that had been derailed by Chloe's interference. My coworkers, now aware of the truth, were supportive and understanding. My boss told me that the concerns raised by Chloe had never affected her opinion of me, that she had known from the start that something about the situation felt wrong. Daniel was my rock throughout it all. He was patient and supportive, never pushing me to talk about it if I did not want to, but always there when I needed to process what had happened. He helped me see a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma, and the sessions were invaluable. I learned that what I had experienced had a name. I learned that my reactions were normal. I learned that healing was possible. But I also learned that I was not done with Chloe Winters. Not yet. Because even as her life fell apart, she was still trying to hurt me. It started with anonymous messages, emails from accounts I did not recognize, filled with vitriol and accusations, comments on my social media posts from profiles that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. I knew it was her, even without proof. The language was too specific, the grievances too personal. She was hiding behind anonymity, but her rage was unmistakable. I ignored the messages at first, assuming they would stop once she ran out of energy. But they did not stop. They escalated. The messages became darker, more threatening. One of them described my new apartment in detail, including the color of the door and the type of lock. She had been following me. She knew where I lived. I went back to the police with the new evidence. This time, they took it more seriously. A detective was assigned to my case, a no-nonsense woman named Detective Maria Santos, who had seen plenty of harassment cases in her career. She reviewed the messages and confirmed what I already suspected. The harassment was escalating in a pattern that suggested an increasing risk. She recommended that I take additional precautions. I installed a security camera in my apartment. I varied my routes to and from work. I made sure someone always knew where I was and when to expect me home. I lived in a state of heightened vigilance, always watching, always waiting for Chloe to make her next move. But I was also gathering evidence. Every message she sent, every anonymous attack, was documented and filed. I was building a case for a restraining order, and this time, I was determined to see it through. The break came unexpectedly. A woman named Rebecca Chen reached out to me through mutual contacts. She said she had seen my posts about Chloe and had a story of her own to share. We met for coffee, and what she told me added another layer to the nightmare. Rebecca had been Chloe's roommate 4 years earlier, before I had ever met her. She had experienced the same pattern of manipulation and betrayal. Chloe had stolen from her, had lied about her, had systematically worked to destroy her reputation. When Rebecca had tried to fight back, Chloe had gaslit her so effectively that Rebecca had started to question her own sanity. She had eventually moved out in the middle of the night, too traumatized to confront Chloe directly. But that was not the worst of it. Rebecca told me that there had been others. She had connected with 2 other women who had similar stories, former roommates, former colleagues, former friends who had all been targeted by Chloe over the years. The pattern was always the same. Chloe would identify someone who had something she wanted. She would befriend them, win their trust, and then slowly work to take what they had while simultaneously destroying their credibility. She was a predator, and she had been doing this for years. Rebecca and I started corresponding regularly. We shared evidence and compared notes. We connected with the other survivors, building a network of people who understood what Chloe was capable of. Together, we began to construct a comprehensive picture of her behavior, spanning more than a decade and involving at least half a dozen victims. It was Rebecca who suggested we go public, not with a lawsuit, not with criminal charges, but with our stories. She had a friend who was a producer at a podcast that investigated patterns of predatory behavior. The podcast had a large audience and had been responsible for exposing several serial scammers and manipulators in the past. If we could share our stories there, Rebecca said, it would warn others. It would prevent Chloe from ever doing this again, and it would finally hold her accountable in a way that the legal system had not been able to. I was hesitant at first. Going public meant exposing my own experience to scrutiny. It meant reliving the trauma in front of an audience of strangers. It meant making myself vulnerable in ways that felt terrifying. But it also meant justice, real justice, not just for me, but for everyone Chloe had hurt. I agreed to participate. The interview process was thorough and professional. The producers took weeks to verify our stories, cross-referencing details, confirming timelines, reviewing the evidence we had gathered. They interviewed each of us separately, asking detailed questions about our experiences. They consulted experts on predatory behavior who confirmed that Chloe's pattern was consistent with what they called a covert aggressor, someone who uses charm and manipulation to harm others while maintaining a facade of innocence. Our eyes met, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she started walking toward me. Every instinct told me to run, to get back inside, to call the police. But I stood my ground. I was tired of running. I was tired of being afraid. If Chloe wanted a confrontation, then she would get one. But it would be on my terms. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, but not close enough to touch. Her voice was low and rough, nothing like the charming tone I remembered. She asked why I had done it, why I had destroyed her life, why I had turned everyone against her. She said she had lost everything, her job, her friends, her family. She said she had nowhere left to go. She said it was all my fault. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I took a deep breath and spoke calmly. I told her that she had destroyed her own life, that every consequence she faced was the direct result of her own choices, that she had lied, manipulated, stolen, and betrayed, and that the truth had simply caught up with her. I told her that I had not turned anyone against her, that I had simply shown them who she really was. And I told her that she needed to leave me alone, permanently, because if she ever contacted me again, if she ever came near me or anyone I cared about, I would not hesitate to pursue every legal remedy available. Then I told her something else, something I had not planned to say, but that came out anyway. I told her that I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I was tired of carrying the weight of her betrayal. I told her that holding on to anger was like drinking poison, and hoping the other person would die. I had spent enough time being consumed by what she had done to me. I was ready to move on. Chloe stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. I watched her disappear around the corner, and that was the last time I ever saw her. The months that followed were a time of healing and growth. I focused on building a life that was entirely my own, free from the shadow of Chloe's manipulation. I threw myself into my work and received another promotion, this time to a leadership position overseeing a team of junior associates. I deepened my relationship with Daniel, and eventually, we moved in together into an apartment that felt like home from the first moment. I maintained connections with the other survivors, checking in regularly, supporting each other through the ongoing process of recovery. I also became an advocate. I started speaking publicly about my experience, sharing what I had learned about recognizing and responding to covert manipulation. I worked with the podcast producers to create resources for others who might be going through similar situations. I volunteered with an organization that supported survivors of financial abuse. I took the pain that Chloe had caused me and transformed it into something meaningful. The legal process took time, but eventually there was a resolution. The police had continued investigating the harassment after I had provided the additional evidence, and they were able to trace some of the anonymous messages back to Chloe. She was charged with stalking and harassment, and after a lengthy court process, she pleaded guilty to reduced charges. The sentence was probation and mandatory counseling, not the prison time some part of me had hoped for, but it was official recognition of what she had done. It was accountability. I also filed a civil suit for the money she had stolen. With the documented evidence I had gathered, the case was straightforward. She was ordered to repay everything she had taken, plus damages. She would be paying me back for years. But the real justice was not financial. It was in the transformation of my life. I learned that I was stronger than I had ever known. I learned that I could survive betrayal and come out the other side with my integrity intact. I learned that the people who truly loved me would stand by me, and that the ones who did not were never worth my energy in the first place. I learned that revenge, in the end, was not about hurting the person who had hurt me. It was about reclaiming my own story. It was about refusing to be defined by someone else's cruelty. Chloe Winters came into my life wearing a mask, and she left it with that mask shattered into 1,000 pieces. She thought she could take everything from me, but in the end, she only revealed her own emptiness. She is out there somewhere now, I suppose, picking up the pieces of the life she destroyed. I hope she learns from it. I hope she changes. But whether she does or not is no longer my concern. My concern is my own life, my own joy, my own future, and that future is brighter than I ever imagined. I think about the night I first walked into that apartment, full of hope and trust and the certainty that I had finally found a friend. I think about all the dinners and movie nights and conversations that seemed so real at the time. I think about the slow revelation of the truth, the heartbreak and terror and rage that followed. And then I think about where I am now, sitting in my own home, surrounded by people who love me, doing work that matters, living a life that is authentic and full. The journey from that apartment to this moment was brutal, but it was also necessary. It forced me to become the person I was always meant to be. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most become our greatest teachers. Chloe taught me to trust my instincts. She taught me to document everything. She taught me that some people wear masks so convincingly that you can live with them for months without ever glimpsing the face beneath. Most importantly, she taught me that I am not defined by what happens to me. I am defined by how I respond. I responded by telling the truth. I responded by demanding accountability. I responded by refusing to let her narrative become my reality. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all. If you are listening to this and you recognize something in my story, if there is a Chloe in your life, someone who seems too good to be true, someone whose friendship feels slightly off in ways you cannot quite explain. Trust yourself. Pay attention to the whispers of doubt. They might just save your life. Because the enemy in your home might not look like an enemy. They might look like a friend. They might even be living in the next room.